SC Media and our sponsor, Sempris, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories podcast. Hosted by yours truly, Jessica Hoffman. This is a show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of CISO Stories. We have Joe Sullivan back with us again. Thank you so much, Joe. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. As far as your background, wow, super impressive. Chief Security Officer for Facebook, Uber, Cloudflare, and I know you do a dozen other things and philanthropy and everything with Ukraine, which is absolutely amazing. I gotta say, when I was reading your bio and doing my recon on you, what stood out was that you're general counsel, and that's kind of like I always was when I grow up. I wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know if it's too late now. But it's just super exciting, especially with cybersecurity. The laws that are within the United States, not to mention globally, are just they're so fickle. Nothing's super defined with this industry. So I just think that's so cool that you have that background and you have both the chief security officer and legal counsel. So, as we talked about a couple days ago, I was thinking, let's talk about that today and emphasize your experience there. I mean, obviously you have had probably some very stressful situations as a chief security officer, and very rewarding ones as well. But I really would like to talk a little about it and hear about your experience as a legal counsel and having that law degree and law background and what that meant for you as a chief security officer as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to so many security executives who say to me, boy, some people think I should go get a business degree to kind of like help advance my career, but I think I need to go get a legal degree because our profession's getting so complicated from a legal standpoint. And to be honest, what I say is I don't think that going and getting a law degree is the right answer if you want to be in security. If you want to go into law, sure, because getting a law degree is a huge commitment. Law school is no joke. It's I went, you spend 3 years in law school, and I think those are the 3 years that were like, I have no idea what happened in the world during those 3 years, because you're just so head down, studying, focused, almost in a competitive way with other students. It's a very different environment, and it's kind of like it's like designed to weed out people and also to prepare you in a way of thinking that's different, and so it's not for everyone. I also
like
think that
sounds like
so
cyber
cyber,
weeding people out. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
but an important thing is the law around cyber is so complicated. Like, as a former lawyer, I don't know how one lawyer can become an expert on everything cyber law. It's vast, because there's regulation at local, state, federal, and many different countries. So, for example, the companies I worked at, eBay, PayPal, Facebook, Uber, and Cloudflare, we operated across the globe. And so any decision that we made had to be filtered through the laws of many different jurisdictions. And like, I would not want to have a company to expect me as the security leader to know anything about those laws. It's going to require a legal team to help you navigate those situations. And so oftentimes, when I was at, say, Facebook, and we were thinking through how do we deal with data requests from government agencies around the world, like trying to understand the laws of subpoenas and search warrants and stuff like that. That's just one tiny little corner of the cyber issues. Forget about privacy and data breaches and all the other contexts. We had to have a number of different law firms around the world to help us navigate those things. So it's I think as security leaders, we do need to focus more on understanding what our legal brothers and sisters care about, and how to pull them in and how to set up better processes to integrate them into what's happening over in our corner.
Active Directory is the #1 target for cybersecurity threats, and is a threat that's harder to detect and prevent than ever. Because in the process of adopting, managing, and securing each unique AD environment, organizations develop separate teams using separate tools and separate silos, which means neither team can detect the threat across silos until it's too late. To combat today's cyber attacks, enterprises like yours need a way to see the whole picture beyond silos and secure their entire hybrid AD environment. Now you can with Sempris. Visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/Sempris. Yeah, so that's great stuff. And as far as relationship, what kind of relationship did you have as a CSO with your legal team? Were they internal? Were they external? You don't have to go into detail with like breaches or anything, but I'm sure you've dealt with those situations where it was impacted not just in the United States, as you mentioned. And we even talked about how United States, our data privacy laws are very ambiguous, and some are finalized, some are not. So what kind of relationship did you have with your legal team?
Yeah, I think it's really important for the legal team to understand what we're doing over in security. And so I always tried to ask, I mean, not just the legal team, but some of the other teams to almost embed with security. So, for example, the same could be said for the HR team. I always wanted my HR rep seated with my team at least part of the week so that they can understand the stresses of our job, because they're different. And the same way I want to have someone from the legal team embedded with us to understand, like, okay, when an incident happens, you know, how do you spin up the incident response? How do we plug in different teams? If you've not spent any time with us, you might not understand our terminology. You might not understand what role each person plays. Like, what's an incident commander? Why are you writing everything down in that Google Doc over there? What, like, the lawyers, they need to be comfortable in that environment, same as the HR person needs to, same as, and I think it also really important for security teams is that having someone from the communications team really understand, because, as we've seen over the last few years, so much of how a company gets judged on a security incident is how well they communicated about it. It's rarely ever a question of like that company's being judged because they did a good job on the incident response. It's almost like they get judged on the communication more than the substantive work. So you can have a massive breach, but if you communicate well, the company seems to ride through it. And if you have a little breach, but you minimize it, you slow roll responding, et cetera, then the perception is that you don't know what you're doing inside that company, and you have a bad time in public perception.
So interesting right there. You mentioned about, HR being involved, and totally agree, right? We need to make sure that our company understands who our cyber team is, what we do, how we best support them, not be the no police. I know we all heard that before. Curious, when you were doing your tabletop exercises, simulations, disaster recovery, did you include law?
Absolutely. You can't really do a simulation of a real life exercise without including all of the teams that are going to be implicated in a real exercise. Probably in security, we have lots of low level incidents that we get to practice on and develop our muscle memory and things like that. But it's the big incidents that you want to be prepared for, and those are the ones that you're always going to pull in different people. And the one thing I learned from being through lots of big incidents over the years is that the people you pull in for the small incidents are not always the same people, right? So you might have someone in the communications team who understands security and your bug bounty program and, the low level noise issues that kind of pop up in on whatever, on Reddit or wherever that you have to go deal with. But then there is the, when you have a company, a company's at risk situation, different people from the communications team show up, and you need to have drilled with them too. I remember the first time that I set up kind of a cross-functional drill, I felt really uncomfortable pulling in like the head of communications, the head of the CFO, the chief legal officer, and these other like high-powered executives. We have a tendency to look at those executives and think, oh, they're so busy, we should only bother them when we really need to.
True.
But the first time I did one of those kind of role play incident response situations, those leaders came to me afterwards and said, "Thank you for doing this. I feel much more ready to work with this team, and I didn't really understand these risks because a lot of executives, they just go from putting out fire after fire. That's kind of what you do as an executive, right? Especially if you're in legal or communications, those are very reactive roles, and so having a chance to prepare and to get ahead of things and to be strategic is kind of what they live for, and they really enjoy getting pulled into those things, I've found.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. Just, those are the times when you really, it's transparency, and you get to appreciate what everybody's doing and what everybody's expertise, excuse me, are and bring to the table. So on that note too, Joe, thanks for sharing that. What are some things that you saw that went wrong or needed to be improved on when it comes to your interaction and communication with legal?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've gotten involved with helping some companies in the security space think about this issue a lot because of you learn more from your failures than your successes, and obviously, you know, the whole, if you're in security and you haven't heard about my case involving Uber, then you've been under a rock for the last decade.
We're not talking about that, Joe.
Yeah, so but talking about your failures is also an opportunity for other people to learn from them, and we really don't want everybody to have to learn the same things through experience. So hopefully, getting out and talking about things. I think that there are a lot of things that we can get better at. Like there, it really worries me when I see security people talking about SolarWinds and analyzing that SEC enforcement case against them right now and saying, "Oh, my takeaway is that we shouldn't write anything down." And I'm like, "No, that's a really bad takeaway." Like it's probably like the takeaway should probably be the opposite, because if you look closely at what's happening in that case, the SEC, they're looking at a specific situation where SolarWinds had an incident, but they're evaluating how well SolarWinds was prepared to respond to that incident, and they're going back and looking at prior incidents that we never heard of. We all heard of the one big incident because of the nation state compromising lots of companies through it. But when the SEC is going in and looking at SolarWinds, they're saying, okay, what was your incident response plan? Did you follow it in this case? What documentation do you have that you followed it? And show us how you handled other incidents, and let's see if you have a pattern of doing things the right way or the wrong way. So my takeaway from that is you need to have a process for documenting well how you handle incidents, and you need to have a plan that is a plan that you actually follow, not a plan that just sits in a filing cabinet and doesn't get followed when the stuff hits the fan and you need to get into action. And so if anything, companies need to start doing a better job of documenting like their preparedness ahead of time, establishing a really good cross-functional collaboration plan, and then I don't want to mention the name of the company I'm working with because I know this isn't a commercial for them, but like having a process that like automates bringing everybody together and documents things the right way in detail would be helpful. Just for a second, like I felt like so much of my, like when I went to trial in the Uber case, it was, we're now all going to spend the next month re-examining an incident that happened in 2016. And the trial happened in 2022. So you're like 6 years later, everybody's trying to remember what happened. And you go back and you look at and you think, Wow, I thought we had a really good set of documentation. We had a centralized tracker. Somebody took notes at every meeting. We have the Zoom logs of who was in the meetings. We can show that lots of people were involved in the investigation, that we followed the normal processes and stuff like that. But it turns out, looking at any incident years later, it's easy to creatively interpret what happened. You can look at it and say, oh, the person taking notes didn't write down their name, so let's just, who was it? Nobody knows. Okay, and was this sentence their opinion or the conclusion of the lawyer who was in the room? Like there's so much that we've got to get better at. When I look back at what I thought was an excellent incident response in 2016, anything that goes under the microscope, you're just going to find things that you can do better at.
Yeah, and that's just name of the game right there. But I'm laughing because in my prior life I was an auditor, and I remember telling my clients that we need to make this as simple as possible when we're documenting it in the report, because it's very likely that somebody will pick this up 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, 6 years from now, and not know what we're talking about here. And the folks that were involved could be gone. So as far as the note taker, you mentioned the scribe. When I talk to my legal folks, they hands down that's number one. Have to have the scribe, and they use that for cyber liability insurance. They use that when there's any legal implications like trials and so forth. So just the importance of having that documentation. So you mentioned the IRP as well. Again, I'm chuckling. Documentation isn't sexy. A lot of times our teams just do things from memory, and they do a great job. But actually having that plan and following it, I think that's super important. And those basic things, right? That's basic cyber one-on-one. You have plans and you follow it when it comes to incidents and breach notification and comms and all that good stuff. So that's one thing that you noticed that can be improved upon. Is there anything else that you lessons learned from mistakes, either from clients? We don't have to tell your clients secrets, but just something that maybe you see reoccurring, because I'm interested too to hear about what challenges that you've seen, and again, let's share them with the community and get better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, an interesting question to ask a security executive is, what percentage of your budget do you spend on incident response? And I don't mean bringing in an outside vendor at the last second to do the forensics or manage the negotiation on the ransomware. I'm talking about like prevention of something bad happening, or structuring your system so that you optimize the response. Like, we spend all this money on prevention, and most of our security program budget goes to prevention. And I would argue that we should also be spending on preparing for incidents. So, like, instead of just like creating a document of a scenario and doing a role play, buying products that put you through realistic simulations, buying tools that help you case manage incidents in a better way. Let's, like, if we think that we're going to do a good job using spreadsheets, like, think about the GRC world. We've moved on from doing GRC and spreadsheets because our environments are too complicated, and we need to have the evidence of each control over time. And so, we've seen the evolution and growth of these compliance automation platforms for a reason, because it's another place where you have to, after the fact, prove that you had controls. Well, regulators seem to care more about our controls and how we're doing an incident response than they do just about anything else. And so I think companies and security teams should be investing more in kind of like the tools that will help them manage incidents more, and not just rely on, oh, I have a really strong 15-year incident response captain who has the playbook in their head. Like, the worst incident's going to happen when that person's in Bora Bora on vacation, and all their experience is not going to help you at all.
So I know this is probably too soon, but let's talk about CrowdStrike for a second. I mean, it's excellent example as far as a global massive outage. A U.S. based company, they're getting sued by Delta that's in the papers now. I'm sure first of many. Just you mentioned quite a few things that I'm sure is already on their radar as far as making sure that they have their incident response for this particular incident documented fully, but also going back to look at others to show the pattern that they do their due diligence and due care. But when we're talking about global working with across the globe, different governments, different regulations, different restrictions. Did you have to go through that with the Uber, and how did you work with those legal teams? There's obviously barriers, whether it's time, distance, cultural, language. There's just so many layers to that communication and that teamwork that has to happen. And I can only imagine there was probably times when somebody was doing their job, but it felt like they weren't, and just getting to understand people. But in those type of situations, there's no time, right? We don't have time to get to know somebody. We don't have time to understand where they're coming from. So, like, in your experience there, like, what are some of the lessons learned as far as working across the world with different individuals when it
Yeah.
comes to incident responses and breaches?
Yeah. So the interesting thing at Uber was, for me, was I learned so much on the safety side. So to put it in context, I oversaw the cybersecurity team at Uber, but I also oversaw what we called trust and safety, which was a larger percentage of my job, which was focused on keeping riders and drivers safe in cars that have an Uber sticker on them moving around on the planet,
Very
which there are
important,
lots
yeah.
of them. And the reality of cars on roads is that they're dangerous, and bad things happen, especially on weekends. And, the busiest time for Uber and any other ride sharing business is Friday and Saturday night. And, the percentage of auto accidents and situations that come up. And so working at Uber and dealing with crisis, it was more about those safety incidents around the world and learning how to learning how to engage. And I remember when I started at Uber, the company was still trying to figure out, you know, if the Uber didn't cause the car accident, right? But Uber did put the rider and driver in the same vehicle in the situation, and might have given the mapping directions as well. And so Uber had to try and figure out what is our voice, and how do we communicate. And in the early days, I think before I got to the company, the mantra was like, oh, that's the driver. Yeah, that's between the rider and the driver, or like, we're just a platform. And it reminded me of like a long time ago when I worked at eBay, and we would always have conflicts between buyers and sellers, or when I advised Airbnb and they had conflicts between hosts and people staying in the apartment. Like, the evolution of technology has put companies in difficult situations to figure out what voice they should have. And my conclusion is that the most important thing is that companies cannot come across as robots, and they need to capture a humanness in their communication. And so I remember one of the first safety incidents that I worked on at Uber, I said, "We're sorry," and because someone from Uber had put me on with the media, and so I wanted to say, "Oh, this is a tragic situation. We're sorry it happened, and we're going to try and do what we can to prevent situations from like that happening again in the future." And like everybody got upset at me initially because they're like, "Wait a minute, we're not supposed to have a point of view, like if a driver causes an accident or a rider punches a driver, like it's between them." And it's like, no, but like it's my job overseeing safety to try and reduce the risk of those things happening. And we should feel bad if they happen, and we should express that. And I think of that because I was paying attention when the outages caused by the Crowdstrike software update happened. And I felt like the original tone in the CrowdStrike response, it had everything except that element. It didn't have the "we're sorry." Like I saw, it was a very terse, like we're working, it was like, we know there's an outage. It was not they said it's not a cybersecurity incident, and we're working on it. And we hope to get things back up fast. But there was not at least the version that I saw didn't have that, like, we're really sorry. And sometimes I think that's where, the companies get into this corporate, like, protective shell mode, and somebody says we shouldn't say we're sorry. That's admitting we did something wrong. And if we admit we did something
Exactly.
wrong, then we'll lose lawsuits. And if we lose lawsuits, then we'll lose value. Like, they go down these, like, crazy paths. And I think that we we did see CrowdStrike kind of get around to that messaging. On the topic of CrowdStrike, there's one other thing that I saw that I thought was a little petty in the security community that I would want to mention, which is some people were saying we all consider availability to be a security issue under, sure, integrity, availability, and having environment compromised. When CrowdStrike said it wasn't a cybersecurity incident, they were just trying to say this outage wasn't caused by a third party compromising our environment. They were like, that's all they were trying to say, and it was clear. But you have cybersecurity people saying it is a cybersecurity incident, and I'm like, come on, guys, like understand what CrowdStrike's goal was in that one line in their communication. Their goal was, because I know when I was at Cloudflare, we would have outages, and we always customers always wanted to know, is this just you unplugged something by mistake, or were you hacked? Customers really want to know that. And it's really important for them to know that because you're part of their supply chain. And if you are compromised by a third party, they might need to disconnect you from their supply chain so they don't get compromised. So it's important for anybody like CrowdStrike to very early articulate, is this outage caused by, is this a SolarWinds situation where there's a nation state inside their software or not? That's the first question that everybody asks. And so they were answering that question. Nitpicking on that, I don't know, just bothered me.
Yeah, I saw that too. I mean, it made sense to me what they said, but people. So we need to start wrapping up, but you dropped a lot of gems here, Joe, as far as the importance of having that legal counsel, that relationship early on. So including them in your tabletop exercises and simulations being much better and using the tools there. So investing more in how we're handling incidents, managing incidents, and not always just the preparation or the protection of the incident to actually occur, which is such a great point because I don't really think I've ever heard anybody emphasize on that before. So I'm gonna take that back and put it in my pocket too. And also the importance of having that relationship, especially in a global environment, because of the differences in cultures and language barriers and not and regulations. Everybody's thinking that, but in my mind, I'm thinking, this is a diverse planet. We need to really understand that as well when
Mm-hmm.
we're conducting business. And we started this off with you saying you don't think every cybersecurity professional needs a law degree, right? And neither do lawyers need cyber degrees, but certainly that relationship is super important. So everybody understands the value that folks are bringing to the table, speaks the same terms and all that. So I got a lot of value out of this too. And like I said, I'm super excited about fact that you're a lawyer. I don't know. I might have some time left, Joe. I might still be able to do that. You might be inspiring me here. So
Okay.
before we wrap up, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
This is off topic totally, but I've always loved to hear what the response is from folks. So, Joe, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self right now?
I think I've thought about this a lot. The best decisions I've made for my career are when I chose to prioritize doing work that I loved. What I've come to discover and what I would like to tell 18-year-old me and really any other 18-year-old is like, when you like what you're doing, you run to work. You smile while you're doing it. You get it done quickly. You get it done well. And your boss notices that. When you don't like your work, you walk to work slowly and you run out the door the second you can. And you do the bare minimum because you don't enjoy it. And so it's really important, I think, to choose a career path that puts you in places where you're doing stuff you love, because you'll do it well and then you'll naturally get promoted and get raises and become more successful. It's like it feeds itself. And so whenever you get to those paths, like, don't choose the short term, oh, that I'm going to make $5,000 more in that job, so I should take that. Choose the other one that you love doing, because in 2 years they'll be giving you twice that in a raise, because you're just knocking it out of the park. And so for me, like, we always talk about, how do you align passion with employment? Like, the more you can chase those opportunities that you're excited about, the better career you'll have. And I'll leave it at that.
That was spot on, Joe. Spot on. Thank you so much. Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us again. That was awesome insight from you, and appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Sempris. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast, and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode. Thanks for joining.